In this tutorial, I'll be showing you how to use the concept sketch photo effect for Photoshop. So this is a Photoshop action that will automatically transform your images into the style that you see here. You can download this photo effect from the link in the description, and I'll also put a link to the photo that I used in the tutorial if you want to follow along. So here's a couple more examples and then we'll get started. So after you've opened your photo in Photoshop, the first thing we need to do is load the Photoshop action. So if you go to the window menu, then select Actions, the Actions panel will appear, and you want to click on this icon here and down to Load Actions. Now you want to navigate to where you downloaded the concept sketch photo effect. Inside that folder, there'll be this .8.atn file. Double click on that, and that is the Photoshop action. So we'll leave that there for the moment because the next thing we need to do is load the brushes that were included in the download. So if you just hit B and then right click anywhere over your photo, that will bring up the brushes panel. You want to go to this icon here and select import brushes. Again, navigate to the concept sketch photo effect folder, and inside there'll be a folder here, brushes must be loaded into Photoshop. Go inside there, and here is the brushes file. Double click on that and the brushes will appear here. Now another way to load the action brushes is to, I'll firstly delete this. If I just navigate to where I downloaded the file, I'll just go inside the concept sketch photo effect folder, and I can just double click on the ATN file from here, and then that will load into Photoshop. Just give it a second. So there it is there, and you can do the same for the brushes. So I'll just hit B, I'll right click, I'm just going to delete this folder, delete the group, and then I'll navigate to where the brushes are, go inside, double click, and then they will be in the brushes panel. Now to create the effect, all you need to do is select the play action here and then click the play button. But just make sure that you don't rename this folder or any of these actions here, otherwise the action won't work at all. You also don't want to play any of these. These actions here are the workings of the effect. It's only this one here that you're interested in, this play action. So select that, click the play button, and after you've done that, you'll just get a message here that says check image dimensions. So what you want to do here is just click continue, and you'll get the image size window pop up. And what you want to do is just check the size of your image, and I recommend running this action on images that are at least 3000 pixels at the long dimension. So anywhere between 3 to 5000 at long dimension is a good range. So you can see mine is 4200, so that's good. So if you open up your image and say it's only 2000, I would scale that up to somewhere between 3 and 5000. Okay. So when you've done that, all you need to do is click OK, and then from here the action will take a couple minutes and the effect will be done. So I'll just skip the video ahead to the result. The action's finished and here's my result. So I'm just going to collapse the actions panel for the moment. And to quickly collapse all these folders here, you want to hold down Control Alt or Command Option and click on any one of these folder arrows, and that just collapses everything. Let's now go through each layer and folder and talk about what it's doing. I'll leave time codes in the description if you want to jump to a particular topic in this tutorial. So let's now turn off the visibility for all these layers and folders, and we'll start from the bottom here. So this is your original image. If you want to run the action again, you just want to shift select all of these layers and folders, hit delete, then go inside the actions panel, select the play action, then click the play button again. Now if you do that, you might get a pop-up window warning you if you want to replace a snapshot in your Photoshop document. Just click OK or yes to that window, and then the action will complete. But if not, we will progress. So this folder here is the backing colors folder. This folder won't make too much sense for the moment. So what we'll do, we'll come back to it. We'll turn on this next folder here called Large Area Fill Textures. Turn that one on. So if you go inside this folder here, there are 3 layers, Area Fill 1, 2, and 3. So I'll just turn off this one for the moment. And Area Fill 1, so what this layer is, if I just turn the opacity to 100%, you can see they are just these large textures that kind of sit but below all the definition, the smaller brush strokes. And the aim of these is just to generally fill your photo with some large textures. And there were 3 of them. So there's Area Fill 1, Area Fill 2 was on by default. And you'll notice that with these 2 layers, if you just check their opacity, Area Fill 1, the default is at 40%. That is so that area field 2 can show through. So here's area field 2. Okay, this is at 70%. And if you turn on area field 3, kind of just fills in everything, but without it, if you turn that one off, this then falls down onto the backing colors folder here, so you can see a little bit of definition coming through from your original image here. Now, if you select this layer here, adjust image backing brightness, double click on this and play around with these handles here, you can kind of see how you can adjust the brightness of your original image backing here, which then sort of creates more definition throughout the textures here. So you can see in this empty space up here, if I adjust the brightness using these handles, you can really make the texture stand out a bit more. So by default, I think the brightness was down a bit here, and I've boosted up the shadows a little bit. So just remember this is on by default, and you can play around with that. So I'll come back to these two layers a bit further on in the tutorial, as I'll probably make a bit more sense then. But for now, I'm just going to collapse those two and we'll move up to the general fill textures. I'll turn this one on. So you can see when I turn this on and off, that this folder creates a lot of the definition throughout your photo. But you'll notice that it doesn't actually add any textures up around the top right hand corner here. That is because there really is no definition up here. It is just the sky. So you can see that that then falls down onto the large area fill textures folder here. So if you're running this action on a photo that has a lot of complexity, a lot of edge detail, then these large area fill textures might not show through too much. So let's now go inside the general fill textures folder, and I'm just going to turn them all off and we'll go through them one by one. So the soft edge textures, if I turn that one on, you can see that that adds some sort of some subtle soft brush strokes around the edge definition in the photo. It kind of just helps define the subject a bit more. And as I turn these ones on one by one, you can see that it adds different levels of definition. And you can experiment with these layers by maybe grabbing a few, shift selecting a few and dragging them up to create a bit more of a different look, or you can turn some off if you want. It's up to you. So the next folder is the abstract textures folder. So I'll turn this one on. So you can see as I turn that on and off, you can clearly see what that's doing. It creates these sort of random brighter brush strokes throughout your photo. And if you go inside the folder here, there are just two layers here. So if I turn them off for the moment, I'll turn this top one on. Now by default, their opacity is at 50%. So if I turn it to 100%, you can see the textures stand out a lot more. So you can turn them up to 100% if you want. That is up to you if you prefer the look. I'll turn on number two. Number two here is a slightly different style. So I'll turn that one up. So you can see combining them both at 100%, you get some really cool effects. So I've just set this back to 50%. Now you can also control where you want these particular textures to appear through the mask here. So if I just hide the second texture at the moment, I'll turn this up to 100%. So let's just say that I don't want any of the texture around his face here. So if I just hit B, then right click anywhere over the photo, this will bring up the brushes panel. So we'll go inside the concept sketch brushes folder here. And this first brush here is a mask brush that you can use to mask out any textures that you don't want visible in your artwork. So for example, if I select this one, and if I just select the mask, this white box here, and if I brush black onto this mask, it will hide the layer. If I brush white, it will reveal it. So if I just use the right square brackets, this will increase the size of the brush. And black is my foreground color, so we're going to be hiding this layer. So if I select the mask, start brushing, you can see now I'm hiding that texture. So I don't want that anywhere. But what you can also do is if you double click on this mask, you can use this density slider here, or sorry, the feather slider. And if I increase the feathering, you can slowly bring back just a little bit if you want. Or another option is to select the mask. If you go to Image, Adjustments, Levels, or Control L or Command L, you can brighten up the area here that we painted in black, and that will slowly, reveal a bit more of the texture. What you can also do is duplicate the layer, Control or Command J. And if I select the mask and then fill this black to completely hide it, so I'll hold down Alt backspace or Option backspace, that will fill the mask with my foreground color, which is black. So now if I turn this layer on and off, it does nothing because we've hidden it. So what I can do now is if I want to reveal a bit more of the texture around his face, I can hit B, I can switch my brush to white, and I can start brushing around to reveal just texture just in that area. So don't feel limited by the defaults of these two texture layers. You can control where they appear and also their opacity. So I'm just going to select this one and let's tone down the opacity a bit. And I'll bring this one down and we'll turn the second one back on. The next layer up here is the definition area fill. So if you turn that one on, you notice a lot of definition comes into your photo, and you can again control what areas you want more definition through the mask. So let's just say that I want the most amount of definition around his face and helmet here. So what I could do is select the mask and hit Control or Command I to invert to black, so it is completely hidden. Then I can hit B, grab the brush tool out, and I'll hit X to flip the foreground color to white. If you hit X, it just rotates between black and white being the foreground color. So white, so now I'm revealing the layer, and I'm just going to start brushing over this area here because this is where the focal point really is in the photo, and I want the most amount of definition. Okay. Now what you can also experiment with is using this same mask and masking out, say, the general fill textures. So if I turn off the general fill textures and look down here, let's just say I want this area to look more like this, and up around the side here on the top. So what I could actually do is select this mask here on the definition area fill, hold down Alt or Option and drag this down onto the general fill textures folder, and you'll see that it's applied the same mask. Okay, so if I hold down Shift and click on that mask to disable it, and then click on it to renable it, you can see the before and after, and you can see that we have restricted the contents of this folder to only appear in the areas of white. Okay, if you want to view that mask like that, you hold down Alt or Option and click on the mask so you can see it in detail. And what I might actually do, I can see that I don't want this patch here, and that is coming from this mask here. You can probably see it in I think that area in black, or that area. So what I could do is just hit B, grab, make sure white is active because I want to reveal the contents of this folder again. And I'm just going to brush over this area here. You can actually just click around and maybe reveal some other areas that you potentially want a bit more definition. Maybe I want a bit more at the top here. It's only a little bit to reveal by the looks of it anyway. The next folder up in green here is edge textures. So if I turn that one on and off, you can see what that's doing. So let's zoom in a bit here to show what this folder is doing in detail. So if I turn these two off, edge textures 1, if I turn that on, what these two layers do, it looks for the edge detail in your photo and it will apply a texture along those edges. So you can see that edge texture 1 has that style, edge texture 2 has this style. So they're both on by default, and you can experiment with the opacity of these if you want to blend between the two, or maybe grab edge textures 2 and put that up top. Okay, you can also grab the definition area fill if you want and put that above edge textures. So edge textures will still show, but it kind of just sits underneath, and more of the actual definition of the photo has more prominence. The next layer up in red is original details, and I've got in brackets here to brush the mask. So if I turn this one on, you'll notice that it does nothing, but this layer is important if you want to reveal much more of the original details of your image. So if I hold down Shift and click on this mask to disable it, you can see how much closer to the original photo you get. Now the idea here is that you want to just brush on areas that you want to have more of that original photo detail. And this layer is obviously completely optional. You don't have to use this, but it could come in handy if you have a person as your subject that's a bit further away and maybe their face is a little bit distorted by the textures where you want to clean that up. So what you can do is, just select the mask, hit B. If you need a quick mask brush, you can just right click and select this first one. Okay, so we want to reveal this layer, so make sure white is active. And I can start brushing now over the face, and you can see those original details coming back in, and we can just override those textures there because this layer is sitting above all the textures. Now sometimes what I like to do is just lower the opacity down a little bit so it just has a little bit of the texture come through. Okay, so if I turn this on and off, so there's before, there's the after, so you can see his face becomes much more obvious, but still keeps some of that original texture coming through. The next folder up here in blue, Edge Details, by default the layers inside this folder are off, but these layers can really help bring out more edge definition throughout your photo. So let's just zoom out here. So if I just turn on Edge Detail 5, you can see the effect that that is creating. So you can use these layers to help bring out a lot more definition throughout your photo, and just take note of the opacity of these layers. So this one is at 50%, so if it's too strong you can always just decrease the opacity, and you can always mask out areas that you don't want as well. So let's just say I don't want the white on the nose here, so I'll select the mask, hit B, make sure black is my foreground color because I want to mask it away, so I'll hit X and I'll just brush there, and maybe there's this bit of this darker tone around the top of his hat here that I want to get rid of, so I can mask that away. And you can just turn these on one by one to see if you like the effect, and just remember that you can always mask out areas. So let's just say that I want to increase the edge definition throughout his helmet here. I'm just going to select the mask again, hit Control I to invert it, and I'll hit X to flip it to white, and I can just sort of mask on bits of edge detail around the helmet here. So I'll turn that on and off. Right, let's just collapse the Edge Details folder and turn on this top one. So this is a pretty straightforward layer. It is a texture that is overlaid over your photo to give it a bit more of a grungier textured look, and the opacity is set to 40%. So if I drag it to 100%, then turn it on off, you can see the effect there. And I've also got it by default set to overlay. You can change the blend mode if you want, but I always like to just turn this one on and off to see if I prefer it with or without. Probably prefer it with it off, to be honest, for this example, but definitely changes on a per photo basis. So I'll leave that one off. This top one here, overall adjustments. The layers inside this folder can help us fine tune the toning of specific tonal ranges in our photo. So if we go inside here, let's start from this top one here. So this layer you can control the brightness and contrast of the highlights throughout your photo. So if you just double click, you can see by default I've increased the contrast of the brighter areas throughout your photo. So you can see that as I drag that up and down. Okay, you can also use this slider to increase the brightness if you want. And the same setup for the midtones here. Default I've increased the contrast, but you can experiment with, say, taking more contrast out of the midtones or increasing it. Let's go back there, and again, yeah, you can play around with the brightness, put that back to 0, and this one here you can control the shadows. So again, just play around with these handles here, and this layer here, if I turn this one on and off, I've called this one flatten contrast, so you can see as I turn it on and off what that's doing. Okay, if you kind of like the look of that, but it's maybe a little bit too strong, you can either double click and increase the contrast here, or you can just select the layer and lower the opacity a bit. And I've just added this one if you want to quickly preview flattening the contrast even more. So if I turn this one on, you can see the difference there. And if I can experiment with lowering the opacity. I usually like to take it to 0% and then slowly increase it to get to a level that I like. But I don't think it needs it, so I'll just leave it off, but definitely one to experiment with. Now this top layer here, overall color vibrance, if you double click on this, by default I've increased the color vibrance throughout your photo. So you can see if I bring this down, it starts to not fully desaturate, but takes out a lot of the color vibrance. But you can always increase that if you prefer the look there. But just keep in mind that I have boosted up the color vibrance by default. So now let's jump back down into the backing colors folder, because we have not spoken about these two layers here yet. So backing color, if I turn that one on, What you're going to do is, with this one, is apply a single color into the background here. So wherever there are gaps throughout the large textures, it then will fall down onto this backing color. So you can just experiment with grabbing a color here. Of course, you don't need to use this, but you can see that you then get color variation throughout the background here. And then you've got this one here, the backing color gradient. So rather than a single color, you can apply a gradient. So if I turn this one on, you can see that I've just set up a default gradient here. But if you double click here and then click on this gradient fill bar, okay, and if you now click randomize, you can sit here and just generate endless color gradients. Okay, and if it's too strong, you can always lower the opacity way down. You can also experiment with changing the blend mode. So if I, let's just say, change this to add, as I scroll down here, you can see different looks get applied with different blend modes. So definitely play around with that one as well. Now another brush that I've forgotten to mention is the smudge brush. So if I just hit B, right click over the photo, bring up the brushes panel. So this brush here can be helpful if you want to smudge some textures. So to demonstrate this, what I might do is create a new layer below the abstract textures folder. I'm just going to fill this in gray. Actually, I might just turn off all of these. So all that we have are these 3 layers. I'm just going to drag these all to 100%. Might just turn this one on. So if I hit B again and select this brush here, what you can actually do is select the layer and start smudging it if you want. Okay, so if there is, say, a texture that you don't really like the look of, just a little patch, you can actually just smudge it out if you want. Okay, so all throughout here, you can sort of just smudge these out. So if I just re-enable everything, usually you won't see it too much when you've got everything turned on. So let's just try and isolate a layer. So this one here, if I start smudging over here, you can kind of see the effect there. And you can smudge any layer, in fact. So this one here, you can select that one and you can go in and start smudging the pixels there. That's looks quite subtle, but if you zoom in, you'll see it smudging. So that's just helpful if there are certain shapes to, say, the abstract textures that you don't like. So let's just say I want to sort of distort the shape of this area a bit. Okay, so which layer is that? That is the bottom one. So I might select this one and then just start brushing, smudging around the edges here, kind of blend that all in. So it's all turned back on. It's kind of not as obvious. So definitely use that smudge brush there. So the 2 brushes that you're really interested in using here are the mask brush. You don't have to use this mask brush, but it's just a quick access one that is set up if you want to use that. And the smudge brush, which is completely optional, but there if you want to experiment with smudging some of the layers around. But I actually preferred it without the smudging for this particular example. So I'm just going to hit Control Z and see how far back we can go here. I'll just take it to there, I think. Turn this back on. All right, I'm just going to delete this layer. So for some finishing touches, I always like to take my work into Camera Raw to just play around with some color and some contrast and sharpening. So what you want to do is select the top visible layer and hold down Control Shift Alt E or Command Shift Option E. And what that'll do, that will merge everything that you see onto one layer. So if I move this layer around now, you can see it's all on one layer. And if you right click, convert to Smart Object, this will just enable us to jump into whatever changes we make now and re-edit them later on. So you can then go to Filter, Camera Raw Filter, and let me just resize this. So that's so what I always like to do firstly is just take a look at some color options under the browse profiles here. So if you click on this icon, you have some basic color options here, and I usually like to jump to modern, and if you just hover over these, you can see that it applies some different color options. So this one here, I can see that this one is adding a lot more contrast and color vibrance, so I can click on that and then use this amount slider here to adjust how much of that I want. So I just want a little bit of that, and then I can hover over this one and let's just say I want just a little bit of that one. And I continue to hover over these to see if there's any other looks I like. Down the bottom here under vintage, this should have some nice options. So maybe I'll click on this one and give that a little bit. Then when you click back, I usually jump into, say, the clarity. If I boost this to 100%, you can see what that does. So you can experiment with adding a little bit of clarity. Texture, you can see what that's doing. So you can increase this or decrease it to adjust the amount of texture. And then you can jump into, say, the detail here, and if you want, you can apply some very fine sharpening. So I usually just like to increase this just a little bit. Then when I click OK, that will apply changes. So if I turn this layer on and off, you can see the before and after. And sometimes what I like to do is if the changes that I've just made are a little bit too strong, I can then just drop the opacity down this layer to kind of blend between what I had before and what I had after. So I can just drag this down. Maybe I just want 60% of this effect. And since this is a smart filter, you can see here's the camera raw filter here. You can just double click on that, and that will open up the camera raw window again. And then you can go back in and adjust all your settings further if you want. So let's take a look at the before and after. So I'm going to select the original image down the bottom here and hit Control or Command J to duplicate it. Then I'm going to hold down Control Shift right square bracket or Command Shift right square bracket. That will send that layer to the very top. So you can see here's the before and here's the after. So that covers everything you need to start creating this style of artwork from your photos. Make sure to experiment with reordering layers to create different looks, controlling what areas have more or less detail through folder and layer masks, as well as taking your final artwork into Camera Raw filter to make some overall final adjustments. So have fun using the Photoshop action, and thanks for watching.